Maria Ramirez sat in the pristine marble lobby of Kingsley Enterprises, her hands trembling as she clutched a manila folder containing her resume. She had been unemployed for 8 months, and this was her last chance. The bills were piling up. The eviction notice had arrived, and her 6-year-old son Eli hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. What happened next in that executive conference room would change their lives forever, but not in the way anyone expected. When little Eli burst through those glass doors with tears streaming down his face, the words that came out of his mouth would shatter the heart of one of the most powerful women in the country. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor as Maria Ramirez stepped out of the elevator, her worn black heels clicking softly against the polished marble floor. She had spent her last $20 on a taxi to get here, leaving her son Eli in the care of Mrs. Patterson, their elderly neighbor who had been more than generous with her time and patience over the past few months. The weight of desperation pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy blanket, but she forced herself to stand tall, to project confidence even when every fiber of her being felt ready to crumble. Kingsley Enterprises occupied the top 15 floors of the downtown skyscraper, a monument to success that seemed to mock Maria's current circumstances. The company logo, an elegant K surrounded by gold lettering, gleamed from every surface, reminding visitors that they were in the presence of greatness. Vanessa Kingsley had built this empire from nothing, transforming a small consulting firm into a multinational corporation worth over $2 billion. At 38, she was one of the youngest female CEOs in the Fortune 500, known for her sharp intellect, ruthless business acumen, and an ability to see potential where others saw only problems. The receptionist, a perfectly groomed woman in her 20s, barely looked up from her computer screen as Maria approached the marble desk. "I'm here for the 10:30 interview," Maria said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Maria Ramirez for the project coordinator position." "Take a seat," the receptionist replied with practiced indifference, gesturing toward a seating area furnished with leather chairs that probably cost more than Dow. Maria's monthly rent. "Ms. Kingsley will be with you shortly." Maria settled into one of the chairs, her mind racing through the prepared answers she had rehearsed in the mirror that morning. This position wasn't just a job, it was a lifeline. The salary would be enough to catch up on rent, buy groceries, and maybe even get Eli the new shoes he desperately needed. His current pair had holes in the soles, and she had been padding them with cardboard to keep his feet dry. The thought of her son walking to school in those shoes made her stomach twist with shame and determination in equal measure. 20 minutes passed before a tall woman in an impeccably tailored navy suit emerged from the elevator. Vanessa Kingsley moved with the confidence of someone who had never known what it meant to want for anything, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect chignon, diamond earrings catching the light as she walked. She paused at the reception desk, speaking in low tones with her assistant, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who scribbled notes frantically in a leather-bound planner. "Mrs. Ramirez?" Vanessa's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed immediately. "I apologize for the delay. Please, follow me." They walked down a corridor lined with abstract art that Maria was certain cost more than most people made in a year. Vanessa's office was a study in minimalist luxury, with a glass desk that seemed to float in the space, surrounded by modern furniture in neutral tones. The view from the windows was breathtaking, offering a panoramic vista of the city that sprawled out below like a living map of ambition and possibility. "Please, have a seat," Vanessa said, settling behind her desk with fluid grace. She opened a folder and began reviewing Maria's resume, her green eyes scanning the pages with the same intensity she might use to analyze a quarterly report. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of traffic far below. Maria studied Vanessa's face, trying to read the expression behind those calculating eyes. There was something almost predatory about the way she absorbed information, as if she were constantly evaluating, measuring, determining worth. It was intimidating and fascinating at the same time, and Maria found herself wondering what it would be like to possess such confidence, such certainty about one's place in the world. "Your background is interesting," Vanessa said finally, setting the resume aside. 7 years in project management, excellent references, and a degree from State University. But there's a gap here. 8 months of unemployment. Care to explain? Maria had prepared for this question, but hearing it spoken aloud still made her throat tighten. "My previous company downsized. They eliminated my entire department. I've been actively searching for a position that matches my skills and experience." "And in those 8 months, you haven't found anything?" Vanessa's tone was neutral, but Maria detected a note of skepticism. "I've had several interviews, but nothing has worked out." Maria chose her words carefully, not wanting to reveal the full extent of her desperation. She couldn't tell this powerful woman about the nights she had lain awake, calculating how to stretch their dwindling savings, or the mornings when she had pretended to eat breakfast so Eli wouldn't know there wasn't enough food for both of them. Meanwhile, across town in their small apartment, Eli Ramirez was experiencing his own crisis. Mrs. Patterson had promised to watch him while his mother went to her important meeting, but the elderly woman had fallen asleep in her chair, leaving Eli alone with his growing anxiety. He was a bright child, wise beyond his 6 years in the way that children who have witnessed their parents' struggles often are. He understood more than Maria realized about their situation, had overheard the phone calls with landlords and bill collectors, had seen the way his mother's face looked when she thought he wasn't watching. The worry had been building in his chest all morning like a balloon expanding until it felt ready to burst. His mother had been so nervous about this interview, had talked about it for days with a mixture of hope and fear that made Eli's stomach hurt. She had told him it was very important, that it might change everything for them, but she had also looked so sad when she thought he wasn't looking, so scared and tired and small. When Mrs. Patterson's snoring grew loud enough to rattle the windows, Eli made a decision that would alter the course of multiple lives. He quietly slipped out of the apartment, taking the crumpled piece of paper where his mother had written the address of Kingsley Enterprises. He had memorized it anyway, the way children memorize things that feel important to the adults they love. He knew how to get there, had ridden the bus with his mother when she had first gone to drop off her application, and he had been saving his allowance money for weeks, though he wasn't sure what he was saving it for until this moment. The bus ride downtown seemed to take forever, and Eli pressed his face against the window, watching the neighborhoods change from run-down apartments to gleaming office buildings. He thought about his mother's face that morning, the way she had knelt down to hug him goodbye, holding him a little too tight, a little too long. She had smelled like the soap from the dollar store and the vanilla perfume she wore only on special occasions, and her hands had been shaking when she smoothed his hair back from his forehead. Back in Vanessa's office, the interview was progressing with clinical efficiency. Maria answered each question with practiced precision, drawing on her experience and education to present herself as the ideal candidate. But beneath the professional veneer, she was fighting a battle against the voice in her head that whispered about all the ways this could go wrong, all the reasons why Vanessa Kingsley might look at her and see someone not quite good enough for this pristine world of success and certainty. "Tell me about your greatest professional challenge," Vanessa said, leaning back in her chair with the air of someone who had heard every possible variation of this answer. Maria considered her response carefully. "In my last position, we were tasked with implementing a new software system across multiple departments within an impossible time frame. The budget was tight, the timeline was unrealistic, and there was significant resistance from staff who were comfortable with the old system. How did you handle it?" "I broke the project down into manageable phases, identified key stakeholders in each department, and created incentive structures that made the change feel like an opportunity rather than an obstacle. We completed the implementation 2 weeks ahead of schedule and under budget. Vanessa nodded approvingly, making a note in the margin of Maria's resume. For a moment, Maria allowed herself to hope that this might actually work, that she might walk out of this office with a job that would solve all their problems. The salary was more than she had made in her previous position, enough to not just survive but to actually live, to give Eli the childhood he deserved, instead of the constant stress and uncertainty that had defined their lives for the past 8 months. The building's security system was state-of-the-art, but it was designed to keep people out, not to keep determined 6-year-olds in. Eli had followed a group of suited professionals through the lobby, his small form invisible among the forest of legs and briefcases. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending to another world, one where everything was clean and bright and smelled like expensive air freshener instead of the mildew and cooking odors that permeated their apartment building. He had never been in a place like this before, and the opulence was overwhelming. The marble floors reflected his image like a mirror, and the artwork on the walls looked like something from the museum his mother had taken him to once, back when they still had money for such luxuries. The people walking through the corridors moved with purpose and confidence, their clothes crisp and their faces smooth, with the kind of certainty that comes from never having to worry about where the next meal will come from. "Can I help you?" The receptionist's voice cut through Eli's wonder like a blade. She was looking at him with the expression adults wore when they encountered children in places where children weren't supposed to be, a mixture of annoyance and suspicion that made Eli's courage falter. "I'm looking for my mom," he said, his voice smaller than he had intended. "She's talking to the important lady." "What's your mother's name?" "Maria." "Maria Ramirez. She's in the meeting about the job." The receptionist's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. "You can't be here without an adult, sweetheart. I'm going to have to call security." Panic flared in Eli's chest. He had come too far to be stopped now. Had used his last $3 on bus fare and walked 6 blocks from the bus stop because he couldn't afford the full fare to get closer. The thought of being removed from the building, of failing in his mission to help his mother, was enduré. Unbearable. "End. Please," he said, tears beginning to well in his eyes. "I just need to see her. It's really important." In Vanessa's office, the interview was reaching its conclusion. Maria had performed well, answering every question with the kind of polished professionalism that came from years of experience and months of preparation. She could see in Vanessa's eyes that she was being seriously considered, that all her rehearsing and hoping might actually pay off. "Do you have any questions for me?" Vanessa asked, settling back in her chair with the air of someone who was merely going through the motions. "What does success look like in this role?" Maria replied, using one of the standard questions she had researched online. "What would I need to accomplish in the first 90 days to exceed your expectations?" Vanessa was beginning to respond when the sound of raised voices in the corridor interrupted her. Both women turned toward the glass wall that separated the office from the hallway, where they could see the receptionist speaking urgently into her phone while trying to block the path of a small figure that was clearly determined to get past her. "I apologize," Vanessa said, rising from her chair with obvious irritation. "Let me handle this disruption." But before she could reach the door, it burst open, and Eli Ramirez stumbled into the office, his face flushed from running and streaked with tears that he had been trying desperately to hold back. His clothes were rumpled from the bus ride and the walk, his shoes squeaking against the polished floor as he looked around the intimidating space with wide eyes. "Eli," Maria gasped, rising from her chair so quickly that she nearly knocked it over. "What are you doing here? How did you get here?" The receptionist appeared in the doorway, her face red with embarrassment and exertion. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Kingsley. Security is on their way." "I tried to stop him," but he just ran past me." Vanessa held up a hand to stop the apologies, her attention focused entirely on the small boy who was now standing in the middle of her pristine office, looking like a lost sparrow that had accidentally flown into a cathedral. There was something about his presence that shifted the entire energy of the room, transforming what had been a sterile business transaction into something far more human and unpredictable. "It's all right," Vanessa said quietly, her voice carrying a note of curiosity rather than anger. "Give us a moment." The receptionist hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with leaving a child alone with the CEO, but Vanessa's tone brooked no argument. The door closed with a soft click, leaving the three of them alone in the vast office with its floor-to-ceiling windows and view of the city sprawling out below. "Eli, baby, what's wrong?" Maria knelt down to her son's level, her hands on his shoulders, her voice a mixture of concern and mortification. This was her chance, possibly her only chance, and now it was being ruined by circumstances beyond her control. But Eli wasn't looking at his mother. His eyes were fixed on Vanessa Kingsley, this tall woman in her expensive suit who represented everything powerful and unreachable in his young world. He had practiced what he wanted to say during the bus ride, had rehearsed the words over and over until they felt like a prayer. But now that he was actually here, facing this intimidating figure, his courage nearly failed him. "Are you the lady who decides about jobs?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Vanessa found herself oddly compelled by the directness of the question. Children had a way of cutting through pretense that adults had long since forgotten, and there was something in this boy's eyes that spoke of wisdom beyond his years, of a gravity that no child should have to carry. "Yes," she said simply, moving closer, but being careful not to loom over him. "I am." "Please, give her the job," Eli said, the words tumbling out in a rush before he could lose his nerve. "She hasn't eaten today." The statement hung in the air like a physical presence, transforming the atmosphere of the room in ways that no amount of preparation or professional polish could have achieved. Maria felt the blood drain from her face, felt the careful facade she had constructed crumbling around her like a house of cards in a strong wind. "Eli, no," she whispered, but the damage was done, the truth exposed in the most vulnerable way possible. Vanessa stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. In her world of quarterly reports and profit margins, of strategic planning and market analysis, the raw honesty of a child's words had the power to shatter assumptions and reveal truths that adults spent their lives trying to hide. "She pretends to eat breakfast so I don't worry," Eli continued, the words pouring out now that the dam had been broken. "But I know she gives me her food. She thinks I don't see, but I do. And yesterday, she didn't eat anything at all because we don't have any more money, and she wanted to make sure I had." Maria's professional composure finally cracked completely. Tears began to stream down her face as 8 months of carefully controlled desperation finally found its voice through her 6-year-old son. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. She was supposed to get this job on her merits, on her qualifications and experience, not because her child had exposed their desperate circumstances in the most humiliating way possible. "She's really smart," Eli said, his voice growing stronger as he saw that Vanessa was listening. "She helps me with my homework every night even when she's tired. And she reads to me even when her eyes hurt, because she's been looking for jobs on the computer all day. She never gives up, even when she's sad. She thinks I don't know how sad she is, but I do." Vanessa felt something shift inside her chest, a sensation she hadn't experienced in years. Her life had been carefully constructed to avoid exactly this kind of raw, unfiltered emotion. She had built walls around herself, professional and personal barriers that kept her safe from the messy complications of human need and vulnerability. But this child's words were finding cracks in those walls, forcing her to confront truths about the world that her success had allowed her to ignore. "She deserves the job," Eli said, his small hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Not because we're hungry, but because she's the best person I know. She never lies, except to make me feel better, and she never gives up even when everything is scary. Please, please give her the job." The office fell silent except for the soft sound of Maria's crying and the distant hum of the city 42 floors below. Vanessa found herself looking at this woman she had been interviewing with entirely new eyes, seeing not just a job candidate with impressive credentials, but a human being who had been fighting a battle that Vanessa couldn't even imagine. "Mrs. Ramirez," Vanessa said quietly, her voice carrying a gentleness that her employees would have found shocking. "Look at me." Maria raised her head, her face flushed with shame and tears, expecting to see pity or disgust in the CEO's eyes. Instead, she found something that looked almost like recognition, as if Vanessa was seeing her truly for the first time. "How long has it been since you've eaten?" The question was simple, direct, and somehow more personal than anything that had been asked during the formal interview. Maria wanted to lie, to preserve what little dignity she had left, but her son's honesty had stripped away her ability to pretend. "2 days," she whispered. "Maybe 3. I lose track sometimes." Vanessa felt the words hit her like a physical blow. She thought about her own morning, about the expensive coffee she had barely touched, the catered breakfast meeting where she had been too busy to eat, the lunch reservation at the city's most exclusive restaurant that she would probably cancel because she was too busy to enjoy it. The contrast was so stark it made her feel momentarily dizzy. "And you came to this interview anyway," Vanessa said, and it wasn't really a question. "I had to," Maria replied. "This job, it's everything. It's our chance to start over. To give Eli a real home instead of the tiny apartment where the heat doesn't work and the neighbors fight all night. It's his chance to have the childhood he deserves, instead of worrying about whether we'll have enough money for groceries." Eli moved closer to his mother, his small hand finding hers and squeezing tight. The gesture was protective, as if he understood that she was exposed and vulnerable in a way that required his support. The role reversal was heartbreaking, this 6-year-old boy trying to comfort and protect his mother when it should have been the other way around. Vanessa walked to her desk and picked up her phone, dialing a number from memory. "Janet, I need you to have someone bring up sandwiches from the deli downstairs, and some of those cookies from the bakery on 5th, and milk. Bring it to my office immediately." She hung up and turned back to Maria and Eli, who were looking at her with expressions of confusion and hope. "You're going to eat something," Vanessa said, and her tone left no room for argument. "Both of you, and then we're going to talk. Ms. Kingsley," Maria began, but Vanessa cut her off with a gesture. "Vanessa, and we're not discussing the job right now. We're discussing the fact that you haven't eaten in 3 days, and you still managed to give one of the most professional interviews I've conducted in months." The food arrived within minutes, carried by an assistant who looked slightly bewildered but didn't dare question the unusual request. Vanessa cleared a space on her glass desk, transforming it from a symbol of corporate power into an impromptu dining table. She watched as Maria tried to eat slowly, with dignity, but her hunger was so profound that she couldn't quite manage it. Eli ate with the focused intensity of a child who had learned not to take food for granted. "Tell me about your situation," Vanessa said when they had finished eating. "All of it. No interview answers, no professional polish, just the truth." Maria looked at her son, who nodded encouragingly, and began to speak. She told Vanessa about the layoffs, about the months of fruitless job searching, about the eviction notice that was coming due in 2 weeks. She talked about the night she had lain awake doing calculations, trying to figure out how to make $23 stretch to cover a week's worth of meals. She described the humiliation of having to ask Mrs. Patterson for help, the way it felt to see other children with new clothes and toys, while Eli wore shoes with holes and played with toys they had found at garage sales. But she also talked about the hope that had kept her going, the determination to provide a better life for her son. She spoke about the library where she had spent hours applying for jobs online, about the way Eli had never complained even when they had been down to peanut butter sandwiches for every meal. She talked about her dreams for the future, about wanting to give her son opportunities she had never had, about the college fund she had once started that had long since been depleted to pay for rent and groceries. Vanessa listened to every word, her mind racing as she processed not just the story, but the woman telling it. Here was someone who had faced circumstances that would have broken many people, who had maintained her dignity and determination in the face of overwhelming challenges. The professional qualifications that had impressed her during the interview suddenly seemed secondary to the character and resilience that Maria was displaying. "What would you do if you got this job?" Vanessa asked when Maria had finished speaking. "First, I'd find us a better place to live," Maria said without hesitation. "Somewhere safe, where Eli could have his own room and we wouldn't have to worry about the landlord threatening eviction every month. Then I'd catch up on all the bills we've fallen behind on. After that, I'd start saving again, for emergencies and for Eli's future." "What about yourself? What would you want that's just for you?" The question seemed to surprise Maria, as if the concept of wanting something solely for herself was foreign. "I can't remember the last time I thought about that," she said slowly. "I guess I'd like to go back to school, maybe get my master's degree. I used to dream about that before." Vanessa nodded, understanding more than Maria realized. She had built her empire on the principle that success was earned through merit, that the world was fundamentally fair, and that those who worked hard enough and smart enough would inevitably rise to the top. But this conversation was forcing her to confront the reality that circumstances could trap good people, that sometimes merit wasn't enough to overcome the grinding weight of poverty and bad luck. "Eli," Vanessa said, turning to the boy who had been listening to this conversation with the solemnity of a much older child, "what do you want to be when you grow up?" "I want to help people like you helped us today," he said without hesitation. "I want to be someone who can make sure moms don't have to be scared about feeding their kids." The simple honesty of the statement hit Vanessa harder than any business proposal or quarterly report ever had. This child had experienced want and uncertainty in ways that no child should, and instead of becoming bitter or hopeless, he had developed a desire to prevent others from experiencing the same pain. It was a lesson in resilience and compassion that all her wealth and success hadn't taught her. "The job is yours," Vanessa said quietly, the words surprising her as much as they surprised Maria. "If you want it." Maria stared at her in shock, hardly daring to believe what she had heard. "But you said you were interviewing other candidates. You said you needed time to make a decision." "I've made my decision," Vanessa replied. "You're not just qualified for this position, you're exactly what this company needs. Someone who understands what it means to fight for something important, who doesn't give up when things get difficult." Tears began to stream down Maria's face again, but these were different tears, tears of relief and gratitude and overwhelming emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, so much." But Vanessa wasn't finished. Something had shifted in her during this conversation, some fundamental change in how she saw the world and her place in it. "I want to do more than just offer you a job," she said slowly, the words forming as she spoke them. "I want to understand. I want to see how you've been living, what you've been going through." "I don't understand," Maria said, confusion replacing the joy on her face. "I want to visit your home, today. I want to see your life, to understand what I've been missing from my ivory tower up here." The request was unprecedented, shocking in its directness and intimacy. CEOs of major corporations didn't visit the homes of their employees, didn't expose themselves to the messiness and vulnerability of real life. But Vanessa felt compelled by something she couldn't quite name, a need to bridge the gap between her world and Maria's, to understand the reality that existed beyond the marble lobbies and glass offices of her daily existence. "You don't have to do that," Maria said, her voice reflecting both gratitude and embarrassment. "Our place, it's not much to look at." "That's exactly why I need to see it," Vanessa replied. "I've been making decisions about people's lives from up here, but I've never actually seen what those lives look like." The drive across town was a journey between worlds, from the gleaming corporate district to the neighborhoods where Maria and Eli lived. Vanessa had insisted on driving them herself, dismissing her usual driver and security detail in favor of an intimacy that felt both foreign and necessary. She drove a luxury sedan that cost more than most people made in 2 years, but as they moved through progressively rougher neighborhoods, the expensive car began to feel like a barrier rather than a symbol of success. "Turn here," Maria said quietly, directing Vanessa into a complex of apartment buildings that had seen better days decades ago. The paint was peeling, the parking lot was cracked and potholed, and the playground equipment looked like it had been installed sometime in the 1980s and never maintained since. Vanessa parked the car and looked around, trying to process the reality of where Maria and Eli had been living. This wasn't poverty as she had imagined it, sanitized and distant. This was the daily reality of broken dreams and limited options, of making do with less and finding dignity in circumstances that seemed designed to strip it away. "This is it," Maria said, her voice carrying a mixture of shame and defiance. Home sweet home. They climbed 2 flights of stairs that smelled of cooking and cleaning chemicals, past doors that had been painted over so many times that the original color was just a memory. Maria's apartment was at the end of the hall, and she fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking slightly as she prepared to expose her private world to this powerful woman who could change everything with a word. The apartment was tiny, perhaps 400 square feet, divided into a living room that doubled as Maria's bedroom, a kitchenette that could barely accommodate 1 person, and a small bedroom that served as Eli's space. But despite the cramped quarters and the obvious signs of financial strain, it was clean and organized, decorated with the kind of care that comes from making the best of what you have. Vanessa stood in the doorway, taking in the details that told the story of their struggle. The furniture was mismatched and worn, clearly acquired from thrift stores and garage sales. The kitchen contained only the basics, and the refrigerator, which Maria opened with obvious reluctance, contained more than a half-empty carton of milk and some condiments. "This is where you've been living," Vanessa said. And it wasn't really a question. "The rent is cheap," Maria replied defensively. "And it's safe enough. The schools aren't great, but Eli is smart. He'll be fine." But Vanessa was looking at Eli's bedroom, at the small bed with its carefully maintained but obviously old bedding, at the desk made from a board laid across 2 sawhorses where he did his homework, at the small bookshelf filled with library books and a few precious volumes they owned. It was the room of a child who was loved and cared for, but it was also the room of a child whose potential was being limited by circumstances beyond his control. "How do you do it?" Vanessa asked quietly. "How do you stay positive, keep fighting, when everything is so hard?" Maria followed her gaze around the small space that had been their entire world for the past year. "You do what you have to do," she said simply. "You love your child, and you find a way to make it work. You focus on what you have instead of what you don't have. And what do you have?" "Each other," Maria replied immediately. "That's enough. That's everything." Vanessa felt something break open inside her chest, a wall she hadn't even realized she had built. She thought about her own palatial home, about the rooms she never used and the things she owned but never appreciated. She thought about the distance she had put between herself and the world, the insulation that wealth had provided from the real struggles that most people faced every day. "I want to change this," she said suddenly, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. "Not just for you, but for others. I want to do something meaningful with all this money, all this power." "You already have," Maria said softly. "You gave me a job. You gave us hope." But Vanessa was thinking bigger now, her mind racing with possibilities that extended far beyond a single job offer. "No, I mean really change things. I want to create a program, a foundation maybe, to help people like you, people who are qualified and capable but trapped by circumstances." She was pacing now, her corporate mind engaging with a problem that suddenly felt more important than any business deal she had ever negotiated. Emergency assistance for people between jobs, job training programs, childcare support, housing assistance. Real help, not just charity. "That sounds wonderful," Maria said. "But you don't have to do all that just because of us." "Yes, I do," Vanessa replied firmly. "I absolutely do. Because you're not the only one. There are thousands of people in this city alone who are fighting the same battle you've been fighting, and I've been sitting in my tower pretending they don't exist." She turned to Eli, who had been quietly listening to this conversation with the intensity of a child who understands that adult decisions are shaping his future. "And you," she said, kneeling down to his level. "I want to make sure you have every opportunity to become the person you want to be." "What do you mean?" Eli asked. "I mean the best schools, the best teachers, every chance to learn and grow and become someone who can help people the way you want to help people." Maria's eyes widened in understanding and concern. "Ms. Kingsley, Vanessa, you don't need to do that. The job is enough. More than enough." "It's not about need," Vanessa replied, rising to her feet. "It's about what's right. This boy has the intelligence and heart to change the world, and I have the resources to make sure he gets that chance. Why wouldn't I do that?" The conversation continued for another hour, with Vanessa learning details about their life that made her previous understanding of struggle seem like a children's book version of poverty. She heard about the nights when Maria had walked to work to save bus fare, about the times they had eaten cereal for dinner because it was cheaper than cooking a meal, about the constant calculations and compromises that Deborah defined their daily existence. But she also heard about the small joys they had created for themselves, the library visits that served as entertainment and education, the walks in the park that cost nothing but provided escape from their cramped apartment, the bedtime stories that transformed their tiny world into something magical and full of possibility. By the time Vanessa left that evening, she was a different person than the one who had walked into her office that morning. The encounter with Maria and Eli had cracked something open inside her, had forced her to confront the reality that existed beyond her privileged bubble. She drove home to her mansion in the hills, but for the first time in years, the house felt empty and purposeless, a monument to success that had no real meaning. She spent that night making phone calls, reaching out to lawyers and accountants and foundation specialists, laying the groundwork for the program that was already forming in her mind. She had built one empire based on profit and market share, but now she wanted to build something different, something that would measure success in terms of lives changed and potential fulfilled. The next morning, she called Maria before the business day had even begun. "I want you to start immediately," she said without preamble. "But first, I need you to do something for me." "Of course," Maria replied, still hardly believing that her life had changed so dramatically in the space of 24 hours. "I need you to help me understand what real help looks like. Not charity, not handouts, but the kind of support that actually makes a difference. You're going to be my consultant on this foundation. Help me design programs that actually work." "I don't know anything about running a foundation," Maria protested. "But you know what it's like to need help," Vanessa replied. "You know what works and what doesn't, what preserves dignity and what undermines it. That's exactly the expertise I need." And so began a partnership that would transform not just Maria and Eli's lives, but the lives of hundreds of families throughout the city. The Kingsley Foundation for Economic Empowerment became a model for corporate philanthropy, focusing not on traditional charity but on creating pathways out of poverty through job training, emergency assistance, and educational support. Maria thrived in her new role at Kingsley Enterprises, bringing a perspective and work ethic that impressed even the company's most seasoned executives. Her project coordination skills, honed by years of managing impossible situations with limited resources, proved invaluable in the corporate environment. But more than that, she brought a humanity to the workplace that had been missing, a reminder that behind every decision and every policy were real people with real needs. Within 6 months, she had been promoted twice, her salary increasing to levels that once seemed impossible. The first thing she did was move to a proper apartment in a neighborhood with good schools, a place where Eli could have his own room and a yard to play in. The second thing was to start the college fund again, this time with the confidence that it would actually grow instead of being depleted by emergencies. But the most significant change was in Eli himself. Vanessa had been true to her word about his education, enrolling him in one of the city's most prestigious private schools. The transition wasn't easy, moving from a struggling public school to an environment where his classmates' parents were doctors and lawyers and business executives. But Eli's natural intelligence and remarkable emotional maturity helped him adapt. And soon he was not just keeping up, but excelling. His teachers were amazed by his empathy and wisdom, qualities that seemed far beyond his years. When asked to write about his hero for a school assignment, he wrote about his mother, describing her strength and sacrifice in words that brought tears to his teacher's eyes. But he also wrote about Vanessa, the woman who had seen potential in their desperation and had chosen to act on it. The foundation grew rapidly, attracting attention from other corporations and philanthropists who wanted to replicate its success. Vanessa found herself speaking at conferences and writing articles about sustainable philanthropy, about the difference between charity that creates dependency and support that creates opportunity. But she always credited Maria and Eli with teaching her the most important lessons about the dignity of struggle and the power of hope. 1 year after that fateful interview, Vanessa organized an event to celebrate the foundation's first anniversary. The ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel was filled with donors and recipients, politicians and business leaders, all gathered to hear success stories and make commitments for the future. But the keynote speaker wasn't Vanessa or any of the other prominent figures in attendance. It was Maria Ramirez, standing at the podium in a dress that she owned rather than borrowed, speaking to an audience of people who represented wealth and power beyond anything she had once imagined. Her voice was steady and confident as she told her story, not dwelling on the hardships, but focusing on the transformation that was possible when people were given genuine opportunities rather than empty promises. "A year ago, my son and I were facing eviction," she said, her words carrying across the silent ballroom. "We were down to our last few dollars, and I was applying for a job that represented our only hope. I came to that interview prepared to sell myself based on my qualifications and experience, to prove that I deserved a chance." She paused, scanning the faces in the audience, many of whom she now knew personally through her work with the foundation. "But what I learned that day is that sometimes we have to be vulnerable to be truly seen. Sometimes we have to let go of our pride to receive the help that can change everything." In the audience, Eli sat with his new classmates and their families. No longer the scared little boy who had burst into a corporate office, but still possessing the same compassionate heart that had driven him to action. He was growing taller and more confident, but he never forgot where he came from or the lessons his mother had taught him about resilience and hope. "The foundation doesn't just provide financial assistance," Maria continued. "It provides something much more valuable, the belief that circumstances don't define worth. that every person deserves the chance to reach their potential regardless of where they start. Vanessa watched from the front row, thinking about how much her own life had changed since that morning when a 6-year-old boy had walked into her office, spoken truths that shattered her carefully constructed worldview. The foundation had become her life's work, but more than that, it had become her path to understanding what real success looked like. She thought about the families they had helped, the single mothers who had found stable employment, the children who were now attending good schools, the elderly people who no longer had to choose between medication and groceries. Each story was unique, but they all shared common elements: the strength to endure hardship and the grace to accept help when it was offered with dignity and respect. After the formal program ended, the reception continued with conversations that mixed business networking with genuine human connection. Vanessa found herself talking with other CEOs who were interested in starting similar programs, sharing the lessons she had learned about the difference between effective charity and mere gesture. But the conversation that mattered most to her was with Eli, who approached her with the confidence of a child who had learned that his voice could make a difference in the world. "Thank you," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of genuine gratitude without the awkwardness of childhood ceremony. "For what?" Vanessa asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "For listening that day. For seeing my mom the way I see her. For making it so she doesn't have to be scared anymore." Vanessa knelt down to his level, remembering the first time they had met when he had been small and desperate and brave beyond his years. He was still brave. But now, his courage came from confidence rather than desperation, from knowing that he lived in a world where good people would help when help was needed. "You're the one who made the difference," she told him. "You were willing to speak up for someone you loved, even when it was scary. That's real courage." "I want to do that for other people someday," Eli said. "I want to help kids who are scared like I was scared." "You will," Vanessa replied with absolute certainty. "And when you do, you'll remember that the most important thing isn't having all the answers or all the money. It's being willing to see people as they really are and respond to that truth." The evening wound down with promises of continued support and new initiatives, with commitments from corporations and individuals who had been inspired by what they had witnessed. But for Vanessa, the real measure of success wasn't in the dollars pledged or the programs planned. It was in the transformation she saw in Maria's face, the confidence and hope that had replaced the desperation and fear. As the guests began to leave, Vanessa found herself standing with Maria and Eli in the hotel lobby, the same marble and glass environment that had once seemed to represent everything they couldn't have. But now it was just a building, impressive but not papery, intimidating, beautiful but not more important than the people who walked through it. "What happens now?" Maria asked, a question that reflected both contentment with how far they had come and curiosity about what lay ahead. "Now we keep growing," Vanessa replied. "The foundation, the programs, the impact. But more than that, we keep learning from each other. I have a feeling this is just the beginning." She was right. Over the following years, the foundation expanded to other cities, becoming a national model for corporate philanthropy done right. Maria became its executive director, bringing the same passion and insight to helping others that she had once brought to surviving her own struggles. And Eli grew into a young man who combined academic excellence with a deep commitment to social justice, already planning the ways he would use his education to help others. But perhaps the most important change was in Vanessa herself. The woman who had once measured success purely in financial terms had learned to find meaning in transformation, to see her wealth not as an end in itself, but as a tool for creating opportunity. She still ran her company with the same strategic brilliance that had made her fortune, but now she also understood that true success had to be measured in human terms. The story of what happened in that office on a Tuesday morning became legendary within Kingsley Enterprises and beyond. A reminder that sometimes the most important moments come disguised as interruptions, that the voices we most need to hear often belong to those who seem to have the least power. It became a story told at business schools and philanthropic conferences, an example of how genuine change happens not through grand gestures, but through the willingness to see and respond to individual human need. But for Maria and Eli, it was simply the day their lives changed, the moment when desperation transformed into hope and a 6-year-old boy's courage opened doors that had seemed permanently closed. They never forgot the fear and uncertainty of those early days, but they also never took for granted the security and opportunity that followed. Years later, when Eli graduated from Harvard with degrees in both business and social work, his acceptance speech at the ceremony would reference that day in Vanessa's office. He would talk about the lesson he learned about speaking truth to power, about the importance of advocating for those we love, about the way individual acts of courage can ripple outward to create change far beyond Cain. What anyone imagined possible. And in the audience, Maria and Vanessa would sit together, two women whose lives had been forever intertwined by a moment of desperate honesty and compassionate response. They would think about all the families who had been helped, all the children who were getting better educations, all the people who had found hope when hope seemed impossible. The foundation they had built together would continue long after they were gone, a testament to the idea that real success isn't measured in what we accumulate for ourselves, but in what we make possible for others. And at its heart would always be the memory of a little boy who was brave enough to ask for help, and a woman who was wise enough to listen not just to his words, but to the truth they revealed about the world and her place in it. The story ended not with a grand conclusion, but with the understanding that some stories don't really end. They just keep growing, touching new lives, and creating new possibilities with each person who hears them, chooses to act. In boardrooms and family kitchens, in schools and community centers, the lesson would continue to spread that we are all connected, that one person's struggle affects us all, and that we all have the power to be the answer to someone else's desperate prayer. And sometimes, when the world seemed too big and too complicated to change, people would remember the story of Maria and Eli Ramirez and Vanessa Kingsley, and they would understand that change begins with seeing each other clearly, responding with compassion, and believing that individual acts of kindness can transform not just lives, but entire communities. The ripple effects of that Tuesday morning conversation would continue for generations, proving that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important messages, and the bravest thing we can do is listen.